We we are on Daf Beis on the Dalid, down at the beginning of the paragraph marked chapter Gimel. Now, these two levels, which are called Midbar Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai, and Oel Moed, this is from the opening line of the parsha, tent of meeting, are effectuated through Moshe and Aharon. Remember, the Torah begins by laying out the locale and the instructions to Moshe and Aharon to count the Jewish people. Now, Moshe is called the escort of the king, just like when we bring a chassan to the chuppah, he has come with two escorts. We bring him to the place of the kala. So to Moshe Rabbeinu brings the singularity of the infinite light of Hashem down here to us. He escorts Hashem down to us so that it should radiate within the person in a characteristic that is describable as the Oel Moed. And the expression of Moshe in every generation, he being one of the seven iconic shepherds, is that quality of Moshe, that Moshe is the capacity for connection known as das. That is, that we should know Hashem, that he is the source of all life, and there's nothing other than him. As we say in Divrei Hayamim, know the God of your fathers and serve him. This level of das is not just a simple factual awareness, but it means that we sense it. It is sensed even deeply within our heart, that we recognize as if we see it with our own flesh in a tangible fashion. Like we say, you see it now, for I am he, and there is no other God with me. Now, this pasuk is descriptive of the time of Mashiach. Then we will say, I am Hashem, and so forth. Nevertheless, this capacity exists within every Jew because they all are nourished from the characteristic of Moshe Rabbeinu to effectuate our ability to attach our thoughts of Hashem in so intense a manner that it becomes absolutely as a physical connection, like we see it literally with our eyes. But it does require a lot of hard work. Aharon is the escort of the queen. That is, the queen is the quality of the Jewish people, the source of all of the neshamas, that he should be elevated up and be attached with Hashem, the source of all life. And this is effectuated through Aharon. He also is one of the seven iconic figures that he brings the Jewish people, he escorts them and impacts them, that they should have this level of Midbar, the wilderness, where there is this almost desperate sense of thirst for Hashem that leads to this fire. And this is what Aharon does when he raises up the candles, the bahaloischa. That means the candles, which are the candle of Hashem, the soul of man, through Aharon, that he lights them and he fires them up, he raises up. And there's even more, that it's impossible to come to such a level, which is the level of Midbar Sinai, Oel Moed, which is the soul leaving its very protective garment, the garment of Klipas Noiga, and the celebration that it should be only for Hashem, until he detaches himself from his previous circumstance. That is, he must discharge the ra that comes from the three klipas that hold him back. Therefore, he must sor me ra, avoid the evil completely. And that is our personal Yitzias Mitzrayim. And this is what it means, again, back to the opening pasuk of the Parsha, on the first day of the second month in the second year of the leaving of Mitzrayim, because the idea of Chodesh and the fact that it's year, Chodesh and Shana, both mentioned in the Parsha, are all one. But it has to be shenis. It has to be a whole second repetition of the exodus from Egypt. That is, after we have completely discharged the evil, the Ra Gomor, then we can come to the level of Midbar Sinai Oel Moed through the level of Moshe and Aharon, as we mentioned. And as it's described in the Medrash, that the Yidden only left Mitzrayim because of the schus of the Oel Moed. That is the help of Hashem, without which we would never have the capacity to fend off the Yetzer Hara. And this is what it's described when it says that it's the first of the second month and the second year, both of them emphasizing that it is the second month, the month of Iyar, the month of radiance, that is an allusion to the shining of the moon. That is, that this first level of Yitzias Mitzrayim in the first month, that's the month of Nisan, we have to avoid evil. That is the level of iskafia, of repressing the Sitra Achra. And this is the foundation of all. And then we come into the month of the shining sun, the month that radiates out to us to transform the darkness into light, that this is the Midbar Sinai, and this is that second month. Now, this is also the level that is called Chatzar, this outside level. There's an outside Chatzar and inside Chatzar. And this is also the idea that it describes in the Zohar in the third chapter of Parshas Bahaloischa, that it describes that if not for this, that we would take this basic foundation, we can understand what it says, take from the truma. And again, here the author brings some other reference material. Now, concurrent with all of this, it says, lift up their heads. That's the assignment given to Moshe. That is, that our sages say, Av, father, is a reference only to the very three specifics, and that is to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And the characteristic of Avram is, of course, limitless giving and love. The characteristic of Yitzchak is, as it's described, Pachad Yitzchak Yira. And the characteristic of Yaakov is Rachmanis. That is the compound of both of them. Now, this characteristic of Rachmanis is only the product of das. We might call it here discretion. Like we see, literally, that a person who is just stubborn, and as we would just describe it as childish, has no capacity for discretion. And this is what it says, like a father has Rachmanis on a son, not like the Rachmanis of the mother, because a mother has daitin kala, her das is easily moved, which is not the case with the man, where his das is more expansive, and therefore he has a greater capacity for Rachmanis. And just as it is, and he is merachin, that he can be compassionate, so too we are compassionate. God is compassionate upon us. Like it says, if a person has no das, it's prohibited to be compassionate to him because he doesn't understand that it's compassion. He thinks he's just getting away with it. The Rachmanis is only for somebody who appreciates that they are being empathized with, not somebody who just takes it as a signal to continue their bad behavior. And this characteristic of Rachmanis of Yaakov, that is, even on the highest of levels, because of the Das Hashem, who is the source of all life, there's nothing other than him. And this Rachmanis is equal under all circumstances, from top to bottom. That since all of them are the quality of Bamidbar and wasteland, and all of them have no stature before Hashem, he is the life-giving force of all of them, up and down are all the same. But as it is manifest and expressed, and it draws out this quality of Yaakov, the 12 Shvatim, and the word Shevet, which we commonly translate as tribe, but more literally can be translated as a branch or as an expression, like the branches of a tree are an expression of the trunk of the tree, that his characteristic of Rachmanis, of Yaakov, expresses a whole different level of Rachmanis. The Rachmanis on the 12 Shvatim. Now he explains. The level of the Shvatim is this, that it says that he stands by the 12 cattle, and the sea is above them from above. That is, the 12 cattle are the chariot that carry the sea, and there they are placed the Shvatim. Now we explain. It says in Tilim that in the name of Hashem is made great. That is, that the Digalim, the flags, which is the Merkava, that which carries and uplifts the name of Hashem, which is the quality called the sea, the source of all that is revealed, the level of the revealed world, to give life to the worlds that reveal. So we explain, what does it mean, the worlds that are revealed? That is, that they receive their life force from that which is evidently godly. This is called the, quote, lower waters. And they are called the waters which cry out. Like it says in the Zohar, that the waters which cry out, we need to bring them before the king. That is, that the das and hasaga that we have in the Mayim Elyonim, this level of the bechina of almin, sistim, and the loyaskai, in the hidden worlds that are not evident, they are called the lower waters. And Hashem separated between the lower waters and the higher waters, the hidden worlds that receive their capacity, their life force from the koiches that are drawn down from that which is hidden. And that's why they cry out that they have been brought down so low. And their whole passion is to come back before the king. And so too it is with the characteristic of Rachmanis of the 12 Shvatim within a person, to stimulate this Rachmanis for the divine spark that has come from the most honored place, from that which is the highest to that which is the lowest, from the top to the bottom. Now, the Shtalshlis HaMadreges, level after level, comes from the 12 Shvatim, a reference back to the 70 original souls who were the descendants of Yaakov, who came down, again, Yaakov being the quality of Rachmanis that came down into Mitzrayim. And so too within each person, that he should have Rachmanis on his own neshama, not just for the fact that it was been dispatched from the loftiest places in Shemayim down to this world, but also for the fact that it is invested in limited, crass human garment. Now, this level of drawing out the Rachmanis on one's neshama, and that it longs to be reunited with Hashem, is drawn down from above, like it says, I will place Rachmanis upon them, and they will be sympathized with, almost pitied. So too we find in the bracha, in the davening, we say Abbas Olam, with an eternal love. Avinu Av HaRachman, our Father, the merciful Father, have mercy upon us and grant within us bina, and so on. And this is not for the neshama itself, because the bittul of any hasaga or grasp is the level of the das of Hashem. This all comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, these three levels are three different types of Rahmanis that I mentioned before. They go in a progression from above to below. In order to elevate the soul of the person, which is down at the lowest level, to be elevated from below to above. So the Rahmanis comes from top down, and this elevates us from below. That is, initially it is, as the pasuk says, to the family, that is to the 70 souls. And then it's to the household, that is the quality of Yaakov. And then it's finally to Yaakov himself. And we could say that this is also what is mentioned in the three different forms of Rahmanis in the davening. The first time we see it is in the Psukei de Zimra, where we say, Bahu Rachum, and he should be compassionate. Then it says, again, these are quotes from Tehillim, Zechor Rachamecha, remember his compassion. And in Baruch Sh'amar, we say, Baruch Merachem, he is the one who has compassion upon us. And then we go into Ashrei, where it says, Chanun V'rachum, gracious and compassionate is Hashem. And then in Yitzhar, before the Shema, we say, Barachamecha, in your compassion, have compassion upon us. And in Avos Olam, we describe God as the compassionate Father. That these are these three levels that come from below to above, as we make the progression up the ladder of the davening before the Shema, where we can finally declare that God is one and that we love him. This is also the idea of Sfiras HaOmer, to draw down the 7 weeks, this level of Rahmanis from the 70 souls down to Shavuos, the time of the giving of the Torah, when with each word our souls left our bodies, a revelation of overwhelming love that is higher even than the characteristic of awareness of das. And this is the quote, the description in the Parsha of Kairach, where it says that Hashem gives them, the servants, a gift of service, the level of fire that is a gift of passion that Hashem gives us. And this is what it says, the Gulgulaisam, the idea of Gulgulis, which is that the skull which surrounds the head and the intellect, which cannot be invested within. Now we have an explanation that our idea is to understand what is Midbar Sinai and what is Oil Moed. Now, Midbar Sinai and Oil Moed are the levels of Malchus, expression of Atzilus. Because Midbar Sinai is the elevation of the feminine characteristic of Malchus, that it goes from below to above to that level of called Mayin Nukvin, that is the recipient is reaching out to the benefactor. And Oil Moed is the idea of the resting of the benefactor, the Mayin Dechudin, the masculine characteristic that brings down from Zah to bring in a godliness, a sensitivity in the Mayin Nukvin, even in the Gevura. And this is the idea of davening that we say, Avos Olam, and eternal love, which is called Midbar Sinai. From Avos Olam and forward, we draw down the level called Oil Moed, like it will be explained in Mitzvah Shem. The idea being that we know that at night, there's a level of biyah, of malchus of biyah, that is, again, the expression level, malchus always being expressed if there's something external, like a king has to have a subject in order to be a king. Like it's described, and you'll recognize it from Mishlei in the Eshes Chayil, that teref levesa, sustenance for a household at night, she goes at night, that is, to discover the godliness that is buried within the klipas noiga of biyah, where the 288 divine sparks are scattered. And all of these spheres, the 7 of the character and Chachma and Bina, come down in Biyah to find the godliness. And it's only the Keser that remains above in Atzilus and does not manifest itself down. The very essence, just like the king would never let an ordinary citizen wear his literal crown, so too the crown representing the most passionate essence of Hashem never makes it down here into the hands of the unwashed masses who might treat it disrespectfully. Like it says, the word of Hashem is forever in the heavens, not down here in the world. What then are the berurim that we find, that we discover the divine sparks, that is to take the food out of the waste, like you crack the nut, discard the shell and get the nut, that the spiritual spark that has fallen into the biyah and klipas noiga and has become mixed together with all of this waste. And sometimes there's more shell than nut, which is the characteristic of the good being mixed together with the bad in an intertwined manner. like silver with all of its sediment around it. And therefore, the birur is to separate out the good from the bad and to discard the unhealthy mixture. And at that point, the Ra becomes separated and falls away from it. And the divine sparks, which are the good that have been discovered, are elevated to the highest level. This is the Mayan Nukvin that goes back up to Atzilus. And we can understand this with the mashal of the mixture of good and evil and the separation in our own service of Hashem. That from the perspective of my animalistic impulses, you have good and evil all mixed together. And even though I do mitzvahs and I do avedas, nevertheless, at some deep level, I still have the capacity for taiva. And even more so that we could find within the soul how Torah and mitzvahs that are fulfilled are not always pure and absolutely unified with the fulfillment of God's will without any other interest, because they are all mixed together. Some self-interest, some other distraction. And therefore, there's good and evil mixed together, even when I'm doing Torah and mitzvahs, which is the garment of Torah and mitzvahs that are being fulfilled. And this is certainly true in the essence of my midas. My nefesh habahamis has not been transformed at all. It's just as raging as ever, because I've taken the klipas noiga, but there's even when I'm doing mitzvahs. Now, when I daven, and I daven with real kavanah to the point that my soul becomes filled with excitement for Hashem that comes from my contemplation on the infinity of Hashem. However, at that point, I am identifying the good and pulling it out of the evil, that then I will find how I am, in fact, distant from Hashem. I'm not pure. I'm not absolutely committed to Hashem, because I understand very well the absolute truth of my own self-analysis through my contemplation and my depth and the greatness of Hashem, how there's nothing else besides him, and how my deeds are expiring and are minimal. That's all outside of me, the level of yesh and davar. I do it for myself, my own self-interest. I know all of my own flaws. Then when I daven, I start to reveal all of the bad about me, because I'm doing this self-analysis. Heretofore, it was hidden together with the good, and I didn't know that there was the bad. And I thought I was pure and straight. But now that I begin this process, I'm starting to expose that bad and separate it from the good. And of course, I only want to hold on to the good without any mixture with the bad. Just like it is within the purification of the soul of man, that the godly soul purifies the animal soul at the time that it davens. So too, we understand above the idea of bringing the malchus of Atzilus to purify the klipa in biyah. Now, these 288 divine sparks that fell through the shviras hakelim become mixed together in klipas noiga, like the mixture together of good and evil in the animal soul within a person. And through dragging down this malchus of biyah, that we start to identify and separate out the good from the bad, and the bad becomes separated and discarded, and the 288 divine sparks are elevated above to be subsumed within Atzilus. And therefore, this is specifically through bringing the higher worlds, the levels of biyah, because in Atzilus there is no evil, and the klipa of Atzilus stays even in bria. Like we find, again, I'll try to bring some source material to support this. Now, even in biyah, bria tziyah nasiyah, we have the levushim of biyah, and that's where there is the opportunity for evil. And again, evil meaning anything that's not totally batal to Hashem. You have in bria, there's a little bit of evil. In Yetzirah, it's half and half, and in Asiyah, it's overwhelmed. I mean, like this world is mostly not aware of Hashem. That requires great effort, and this is all in the garments of Hashem. And that's why they can come down. The biyah can come down, and it can be mavarit. Now we understand that we see that when a person davens and he longs to be close to Hashem, all of a sudden he gets distracting thoughts. If anyone has ever experienced such a thing, things that would never distract him otherwise. Why? Because it's dafka because he's davening, and at that time he is separating out the evil from the good, and he's pushing it away. And that's why at that moment the absolute desire to be connected to good and the Ra doesn't want to leave. So it starts to clam on and desperately reach out for the person to distract him and bring him back down here, because that Ra has no identity of its own. And if it's separated from the good, it will not be able to exist. Whereas the rest of the day, the Ra is tolerated. It's there because I'm not engaged in pure good. So too above, that when Malchus comes down to clarify and discover the godliness in the 288 divine sparks, you also have this idea of klipas noiga. And this is what is explained in other source material that the Alter Rebbe quotes. And therefore, it's possible that these machshavas zoros, these distracting thoughts, only come to him when he's davening. And he starts to tell himself, well, that's evidence that my davening is worthless, because that's its characteristic. It starts to push it away because of its desperation to hold on to some level of the good to keep its sustenance. Space. Now, when the Malchus is raised up from Biyah to Atzilus, regarding which it says, who is this that should come from the Midbar in this fiery smoke? That means that when he comes down into Biyah, he is called Midbar with this additional mem. And this is because of the investiture in Biyah, that he should be able to sift through the negativity that has suckled off of the Kedusha, since it is invested there literally, which is not the case when the Beis HaMikdash stood. Then it was yidaber, as we spoke before. The word daber is to speak. When it has the prefix of the mem, the openness of the shape of the mem suggests the opportunity for distraction and hijacking. And the contrary to that is yidaber, which is the quality of mamshala, of authority over the speech, no opportunity for it to be siphoned off by the Yetzer Hara. The point being that then it did not come into Biyah at all, but it was constantly in Atzilus. And this is why it says that in the times of Shlomo, the moon was always full. That is, it was an absolute awareness of Hashem, Zah, and Atzilus were all together. But based on this, we have to understand, if so, how could they discover the godliness in the 288 sparks that fell earlier through the overflow of godliness into Briyatzia and Asiya through Shviras HaKelim, which are only identified and clarified through Malchus. Like we said before, she brings provisions at night to her household. The point being that because then Malchus did not come at all into Biyah, because it stayed up in Atzilus, how then could they identify the godliness? The point being, though, that even though then it did not come into Biyah at this lofty level, nevertheless, the divine sparks were able to be identified because of the singularity and the unity of Zun and Atzilus, panim b'panim. And then, because of the overwhelming light of Atzilus, Memela, it was misparer, it identified the divine sparks, and they were subsumed within the Malchus, like a candle that becomes subsumed within a big bonfire because of the overwhelming revelation. And then, because of that, it automatically subsumed itself into the greater godliness, whereas when it's not in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, it requires our effort. And this is the source of the difference between Yidaber and Midbar. They are all together in the, when it is unified with the source in Atzilus, it's effortless. That is, that the overwhelming godliness is so great that everything immediately, effortlessly is annulled, any kind of opposition, which is not the case when we are necessary for us to act the midbar, with the additional mem, which is open and thus susceptible to hijacking. The explanation being, as we explained, what it says in the Zayar and the Pasuk, rise up, Hashem, for those who dwell before you, Kum Hashem L'chasecha. This is the difference between the Mishkan that was in the Midbar and the eternal Beis HaMikdash, which is called the resting place, because there are the identification of the divine sparks in two levels. One is, like it says, she brings fodder to her household, which is the idea of milchama. Teref also meaning to tear. For example, the king goes out to confront his enemy where he is, and he battles him there until he subdues him. So too, when we bring Malchus from a higher level into this world, it subdues it. We meet the enemy on the battleground, and he is defeated. And that's why the Mishkan was in the Midbar, a place where there is the opportunity for antagonism to siphon off holiness. And that's where we have to go and confront it in a manner of confrontation. Just like in a war, there are times when we allow a place for our enemy to rise up in a small battle in order to beat him in the greater war, because sometimes that's not going to work. Those two, Malchus comes down, and that's why it is called Midbar, with that open mem suggesting vulnerability. the opportunity to thus win the greater war, it's to discharge the enemy. But all this is a birur that comes in a manner of confrontation, milchama. The second level is one that's not confrontational. And that is like the king is simply the king over the whole land. He's such a great king that all immediately subject themselves to it, until the point that there's no necessity for confrontation. Simply the king's presence annuls any confrontation or rebellion. So too, in the mashal above, that there is this bira hanetzutzis, in a manner that is not through confrontation, but by drawing down such an intense level of godliness that it effortlessly pushes away the sitra achra, like the candle that is subsumed within the bonfire, that the bonfire remains in its place, and all the small candles are automatically subsumed within it. They are pushed away, and there's no necessity for there to be any kind of confrontation. Now, in a similar sense, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, even though the Malchus did not come down into Biyah to clarify and identify the godliness in a manner of confrontation, nevertheless, or we would say on the contrary, it was that much greater, because it was simple face-to-face, that through the revelation of godliness, there didn't need to be any confrontation, any battle. It was effortless in the manner in which the klipa was dispelled. And the Kedusha was then reunited within the greater Kedusha, which is not the case after the Churban. Now the kings do have to come out to battle. Now, during the weekdays, during non-obvious godly circumstances, the godliness is more suppressed. And therefore, there can't be this bir nitzutzis in the manner of simple revelation, and instead there has to be an investiture and an engagement with the klipa. And this is why it's now called the Bamidbar, again with that open mem, because it has to be invested within the klipa snoiga. But the hidden mem, which suggests a world of total freedom, where there's no opportunity for the godliness to be siphoned off, that is called the wine that is hidden away from the 6 weekdays for a celebration later. And this is what it means when it says, who will go up from the midbar in this billow of smoke? These are the 288 sparks that should be elevated in a manner that is similar to smoke. This ends this part.